My dad returned to the Caribbean when I was 8 years old, so single parent. Mum worked really hard. I don't know how she did it, quite honestly. She's still the best person at managing a budget that I've ever known. So if you put forward an opinion, you can say it in the exact same way and the exact same tone as the white person next to you, and they'll say, oh, no need to be aggressive. And then you kind of think, was I aggressive? I never really called anybody out when that happened to me. You know, sometimes people say, what would you tell your younger self? I'd tell my younger self, actually, when people are doing something that you're not happy with and you know is not right, call them on it. And you don't have to be, you know, nasty about it or anything like that. Surround yourself with people who are different, so you can learn from them and appreciate difference, and then, you know, really work out how you can use that difference to better each other and yourself as well. And what was really great then, we were all really young, but we were all very open. And we were all very open and willing to share about ourselves.
Hi, I'm Gavita Phull, Associate Partner at Eastern Bridge Partners within the CFO and Finance practice. As an executive search, interim management and consulting firm, we are in a genuinely privileged position meeting people from all walks of life across lots of different organisations. Through these conversations, we constantly hear the importance of inclusivity and the distinct lack of diverse role models at the C-suite level. So we've invited people from our network to share their story and their experiences in the workplace, how they became a C-suite executive, and what we can all do to help create a more inclusive workplace. I'm delighted to be joined by Elaine Grell, a Chief People Officer who has worked in organisations such as British Airways, InterContinental Hotels and a startup, The Collective. She's also a mentor for aspiring HR directors and a trustee for the Springboard Charity. Elaine, thank you so much for taking part and supporting us in this project. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your background outside of work.
Sure. So I was brought up in Preston in Lancashire to parents that came over from the Caribbean in the late 50s. So my parents came from a small island in the Eastern Caribbean called the Commonwealth of Dominica. So I always think of myself as being a little bit special, to be honest, of being sort of like a northern lass, but with a nice sort of Caribbean influence on there. So yes, I was born and raised there, which was really quite formative for me as well, because we were a minority living in the north, but we had a really nice kind of social network for the Caribbean community. So I learned a lot about my sort of culture and heritage through that. But because we were a minority, I often found myself being kind of one black person in a particular group. So for example, at secondary school, there was only 2 black people in my high school year. But it did kind of teach me to, you know, work and live and mix with lots of different cultures. And I moved to London when I was 18 and realised that a lot of my friends, particularly black friends in London, they had a different upbringing because they were just around so many people like them. And I hadn't realised kind of the difference, the impact that can have on you as you're growing up.
And what was it like growing up in the north in Lancashire? Because we've spoken to a couple of other people being in London. You know, unfortunately, they suffered some quite open discrimination, racism, some really difficult situations. What was it like culturally up in Lancashire?
Yeah, I would probably say it was similar. Okay. I think as kids we would, you know, trade insults with each other, but I don't think we really had that much bad intent behind it. Sometimes there was kind of overt racism, but as kids we kind of just brushed it off and kind of saw it as the other person's problem rather than ours. We were always quite proud of who we were, even though, you know, as I said, we were a minority in that sense.
And what was it like at home? Was it brothers, sisters? What's the family setup?
Yeah, so I've got 5 siblings, and my mum actually brought us up for most of that time on her own because my dad returned to the Caribbean when I was 8 years old. So single parent, mum worked really hard. I don't know how she did it, quite honestly. She's still the best person at managing a budget that I've ever known. But when I, you know, again, in hindsight, when I think back and think, God, how did she kind of raise 5 of us on minimum wage and does not feel poor or disadvantaged in any way at all? You know, I look back and I feel like I had as rich as a childhood as anyone who came from a much wealthier background. But it did teach me to be very independent from a very young age. So my mum went off to work. She started work at 6 a.m. in the morning. So my sister and I, being the youngest of the five, we'd wake ourselves up, get ourselves ready for school, take ourselves quite a long walk to school, come home, let ourselves in, sort our dinner out. So it did teach us to be a little bit more planned, I guess, and a little bit more independent.
Yeah. And how, going from your background, what was your path to becoming a HR director? Because you didn't go to university, did you?
No, I didn't. So from school, I would just had this passion for travelling. I just wanted to travel. So when it was time to start having conversations about careers, and I just said, I don't know what I want to do, I just want to travel. What I hadn't realised was that actually I was very strong academically. And people might think, how on earth can you not realise that? But I was just around people, the way they sort of separate you at school, they put you with people of similar abilities. So everybody was as strong as me, so I really didn't see any difference. And also in my family, I was the first person really to be that strong academically. So a lot of my siblings and cousins and friends and so on, the traditional thing was once you leave school, you go to work. And you try and find an employer that's a good employer, one that's going to give you a bit of security and give you a nice path to, bigger jobs throughout that. But I just wanted to travel. So the recommendation there was to join a training scheme, a little bit like the apprenticeship schemes you have today. And I went to join a travel agency. But once I got there, I thought, yeah, I definitely want to travel. After a short time there, I just sent my CV off to British Airways. I said, have you got any jobs? Which feels quite bizarre now. But they did come back and said they were recruiting for two different roles. So I applied and that's how I ended up joining British Airways. And when I got the job with BA, they said to me, they don't have any vacancies in Manchester, which was pretty close to me, but they do have them in London. So I was like, okay, I'll go to London. So that's how I ended up in London.
Just left.
Just like you do, yeah. Went home and said, I'm going to London.
So what was the career path through BA? Because you had lots of different roles at BA.
Yeah. So I joined BA when I was 18. And the great thing about working for a large multinational company like that is there are lots of opportunities for you. And I'm a real curious person. I always used to classify myself as nosy, and then somebody said to me one day, yeah, actually you should reframe that. Curious sounds a lot more professional. So naturally very curious. But I joined BA at a time when I joined in the contact centre, and at the time it was the largest it had ever been, and there were 800 people working there, and I sort of landed in this melting pot of different cultures and ethnicities and people from all different walks of life, all different ages. And I think that's really something that has kind of instilled in me just how important it is to surround yourself with people who are different, so you can learn from them and appreciate difference, and then really work out how you can use that difference to better each other and yourself as well. And it also made me quite spoiled because I really enjoyed it. So everything I've done since then, I've always tried to look for that diversity as well. And what was really great then, we were all really young, but we were all very open. And we were all very open and willing to share about ourselves, and where we came from. We let each other in a way that I thought was normal at the time because we were all doing it. But, working through my career, I realised that's not necessarily normal, and people need a little bit more encouragement sometimes to feel comfortable doing that. But with the sort of passion of youth, we invited each other to weddings and family celebrations and all sorts of things. So you really got insight into people's lives. But there were lots of opportunities for me at BA. One of the things that always kind of followed me through all my job moves was that they always had something to do with people. So I was always involved in a lot of sort of change activities. There was a big transformation going on in the airline industry at the time, big move to self-service, a lot of things that we take for granted now. Booking a ticket online, checking your bags in online, all those sorts of things that we can't imagine travel without. We're all really new. Print paper tickets, that's right. One of my roles was actually writing tickets and then posting them out, so imagine that. Yeah. But it was a great opportunity to just get involved in lots of things that were just changing the way in which we just went about life. And of course, that was also happening in our lives as well. You know, ATMs suddenly being available, you know, checking your own groceries at the supermarket. All those things were happening in our lives. So I had a number of roles at BA. So I started in the contact centre. I had roles in operation in the terminals. I had roles in marketing and IT. But they all had a common thread of people and change about them. And I started managing a team at a very young age. So I was 19 when I first got my sort of first team responsibility. So that teaches you a lot as well. But I think, again, that was sort of a really good grounding for me as a people professional, because I feel like I've now got the sort of practical experience of doing things, as well as being able to be more objective and give people advice and guidance and coaching. Because, you know, some of the people situations that you deal with are really difficult. Yeah. If you've not really done it, it's hard to kind of really feel what somebody's going to be like.
And then how did so it sounds like you had broad roles in lots of different areas. Yeah. How did the move into HR then happen?
Yeah, so there was a major reorganisation and there was a consolidation of all the people activity across the airline. So at the time I was working on a project to bring in online learning. Again, how radical is that today? But at the time it was really new and nobody really knew what it was all about and, you know, could it be effective and so on. So that was considered training, which is a people activity. So that's how I was consolidated into the people function. But once I got there, it just all made sense. I thought, oh God, this just feels like where I want to be, like around people that think people are really important and want to do something about it, and to be able to contribute to helping others really get the most out of their people. As I said, I had the kind of experience in managing teams, so I knew what it felt like from that perspective. And then I'd had all this experience in change and transformation, which I hadn't quite appreciated how valuable that was until that time. So I then decided, I'd just come to the end of my MBA, so I studied and completed my MBA whilst I was working. And I thought, actually, I really want to kind of make myself into a HR professional. So then over the next following sort of 10 years, I did a number of different roles and secondments and projects that gave me exposure to kind of all the different elements of HR. And I also went through my accreditation with the CIPD as well to get my sort of professional accreditation there.
And how did you manage to balance that studying and work and, you know, then doing the accreditation?
Yeah.
Was it difficult? Did you get lots of support? How did it work?
Yeah, it was really difficult. I think the thing that helped me through it is that I was really enjoying it, because I hadn't had any sort of formal education since I'd left school. And because of that, I had to do quite a long route to the MBA. So I essentially had to kind of complete a degree and then able to do the MBA. But I had a really great sponsor, actually, who one day I'd written a research report. And I remember her coming up to me at my desk and saying, Elaine, this is fantastic. Did somebody help you to do this? And I was like, no, I just did it myself. And she was fascinated. And I remember she sat down at my desk and was just staring at me. But I felt she was really listening, to me. And she was asking me all about my background and where I was from and all that kind of stuff. And she said to me, are you ambitious? Nobody had ever spoken to me about my career before or really where I wanted to go with it. And I thought, am I ambitious? Yeah, I guess I am. If I think about the moves that I'd made, a lot of it was very self-driven from me. Anyway, so she then said to me, had I considered doing some more formal study, and she arranged for me to get sponsored for my degree and my MBA. So that really helped, because I wouldn't have been able to afford to do it. And then also giving me the time. So it's through the Open University. So a lot of it was self-study, but then every 6 weeks we had in-person study groups. I needed time off to go to that. And every term we went away for a summer camp or autumn camp, whatever you, where we went away for a week and studied. So again, the fact that she was able not only to sponsor me financially, but give me the time really helped. But I loved it because it was very practical. And a lot of the assignments were really focused on what I was doing at work. So it encouraged you to look in your own organisation. So there were things I could really apply straight away. But yeah, it was tough. I did my very last module I think I sat it at home actually 2 weeks after I'd given birth to my first son.
Wow.
Yeah, because I had a cesarean, so I couldn't go obviously to the examination centre. So the invigilator came home.
Physically came to your house?
Came to my house. I sat at the kitchen table and she sat with her knitting watching TV. With the door wide open so she could see I wasn't cheating.
That's a very surreal experience.
It was very surreal. Very, very surreal.
So the really interesting thing in that story is the person who came to sit with you and asked you that question, are you ambitious?
Yeah.
Where do you think you'd be if that moment hadn't have happened?
I don't know. I think I still would have progressed, but I don't think I would ever have thought I'd get into the level of seniority and accountability that I have today. It just instilled, I guess, a sense of belief and confidence in me that I hadn't had. I looked around me. I could see people in different roles. I wasn't quite sure how they got there. And a colleague of mine, he's similar age to me. We were both quite similar. Well, not similar. He's very different. He's white and Irish, but we just went through a lot of life stages together. Okay. And we were always trying to work out. So how can we better ourselves? What can we do? So we were good, I guess, peer support for each other as well, which is something that I've always tried to maintain throughout my career, to find the peer support and also give it where I can. But the notion of a kind of sponsorship and having somebody that, could talk about you on your behalf to others that may not know you, really invaluable.
Not only sponsor you to study, but also sponsor you upwards.
Yeah, as a person, have you thought about Elaine? Who's Elaine? Oh, you don't know her? That sort of thing. Yeah. And then the other thing that's been really helpful to me is mentors. I've really benefited a lot from having mentors at different stages of my career. And again, I've tried to kind of pay that back. So I do a lot of mentoring now for all different sorts of reasons, whether it's, women trying to work out how to juggle career and family, whether it's people underrepresented groups, whether it's women of colour, whether it's people in HR with a HR career. I've always really tried to give back because I gained so much from that. And then the other thing I think that's really helped me is really strong leaders and line managers. People who believe in me, gave me the space to grow and to try things and just perform, but also be very honest with me when there needed to be more constructive feedback to help you to continue to grow and stretch. So I learned a lot from them. And always, you learn from managers that aren't great.
Then you know
what kind of manager you don't want to be. You know what kind of leader you don't want to be. So although painful at the time, you can also learn a lot from those sorts of life lessons as well.
Don't worry, I won't ask you who those were. So you left BA, and it sounds like that was a really amazing experience. It really gave you great grounding in your career, and then you moved to IHG.
That's right.
What was that like?
Great, actually. So I left BA because I finally got to the point after 21 years, as I kind of looked around me and I couldn't see where my next role was going to come from. There was nothing that was sort of really intriguing to me and feeling that it was going to be challenging enough. So that's when I started to look elsewhere. And moving to IHG was a really nice transition because it was still hospitality and leisure, but a very different business model. So at BA, we own all our assets. I'm still saying we. I'm always going to be a BA girl. But, BA owns all its assets. It's very controlled, very compliant. And I'd learned a lot through that period of working through the great times and the more challenging times. And going to IHG at the time, they just got to the end of what they call their asset light strategy. So they were pivoting from being an asset sort of led company that owned hotels and property to one that was really going to make a business out of their brand and marketing and running a sort of franchised and managed business model. And a very deregulated industry, again, completely different from the airline industry, with lots of multiple stakeholders. So I had a lot to learn, but I joined at a time where we had a very strong CHRO, Tracy Robbins, who was very inspirational. So it was great to have a role model to look up to, and she was very generous and giving with her time. So again, thinking about the great traits you can learn from leaders, that's always something I've tried to replicate wherever I can. And HR at IHG, when I joined, and still has a very strong reputation. So I really felt that, HR could add a voice to the business and to where the business is going and the strategy. And it was great to join at a time when there's a lot of focus on things I hadn't been involved as much in. So around the employer brand, for example, which again is very familiar to us all now, but Tracy was quite a pioneer in that space. So learning all about that. There's a great focus on engagement and how you truly engage people at all different levels across the business, from all the entry-level roles in the hotels right to the most senior executives. And a really nice focus on leadership development and how, again, at all different levels in the company, that really makes a difference. So it was a nice transition, lots to learn, but I also felt that I could bring a lot in from coming from a very strong customer service-led organisation like BA.
And you had you had multiple different roles at IHG.
Yeah.
I think one of them did you actually move abroad?
I did, yeah. So when I accepted the role, it was going to be based in Denham, sunny Denham, near Uxbridge. But after a few months of travelling a lot to Atlanta on business trips, my manager at the time said, how would you consider moving out to the US? There'd been a change of leadership for the functions that I was supporting, commercial and the technology function, and that was going to be more led from the US. And most of the stakeholders were out in the US. But she also said to me as well, if I agree to move out there, she could broaden my portfolio and give me accountability for another function, the technology function, and also learn how it is to kind of work in a regional role as opposed to being at the head office. So I was really quite excited by that, and I was really pleased because I thought she saw something in me, a bit like, my manager years ago at BA. She saw something in me. They recruited me for one thing, but saw the potential for being able to do others. So I agreed and moved out there with the family, and we spent 3 years out in Atlanta, which is probably one of the greatest learning periods of my life, learning the business from a US perspective, but also as an individual and as a person, as a woman, as a mother, moving out there and kind of starting a new life afresh, and what that feels like was really quite humbling in some ways.
What was that like? How did you're in a new role, supposed to be in Denham. How did you say to your family, we're possibly moving to Atlanta? How did that go?
Well, they didn't kind of take me seriously at first, and I went, no, I think they're serious. And my manager at the time said, well, come over, because I was like, although I've been travelling a lot, I'd seen airport, hotel, office. I hadn't really seen, where people live. I'd never seen a supermarket, for example. And she said, come over. And she said, and bring your mum. And again, I thought that was really clever of hers. And it showed just how well she'd already got to know me, because she knew how important my mum was to me and my family. So we went out there. We spoilt the kids a week in Disney first, so they were all excited.
So they're bought in, they're sold.
On the way home, we're just going to stop in Atlanta for a few days. And we're going to look at some schools and some houses, things like that. And we went to dinner at my boss's house, and she was again very welcoming and warm, which was a great trait. Quite honestly, at IHG, it was sort of very family feeling, good family networks, not dysfunctional families. But she kind of showed us what it would be like to live there, and that was really, really helpful for me, because I had comfort in, I didn't have any worries about the role. I'd still be working with the same people. I knew them all, maybe a different office. So that was the bit that was easier. But she really pinpointed on the fact that actually that's only part of the decision, although a big one. The rest of it, which was really important to me, was just as important. So I think it's always really important to know your team. And that's something that I've learned and truly appreciated as I've looked back on my career. It's those moments in time where I've had managers, where I've had peers that have taken time to get to know me, and where, quite honestly, I've let them in. Because there's been times when I'm thinking, not sure here. So I know I've been a bit guarded, and I've seen the impact that has had on how well I've enjoyed the role, as opposed to when I felt comfortable and felt actually, I know what I'm doing here. And even if I don't know exactly what I'm doing here, it's okay. I'm not worried about the mistakes I might make.
So that's really interesting, because is that a bit chicken and egg? Did you being open and authentic lead to then having a more open and authentic relationship with your manager, or they make you feel like you could be open and authentic? Which
a little bit of all of that, to be honest, because sometimes you can be open and it's not returned. So then I'm very values driven, ridiculously so. So I can sort of get a good sense of whether I'm going to be able to get on with somebody through work, we can work together, or whether I think I'm going to be able to have a much deeper connection with this person. Yeah. We'll still get the work done, but it's going to feel more enjoyable doing it together.
So it sounds like the key to you making that decision was that moment where they offered to bring your family over and realise that actually family is really important to you. And that sounds like your managers, obviously knew you really, really well and taking the time to get to know you. So what was living in Atlanta like?
It was great. It was really great. People used to say to me all the time, like, what's the biggest difference between living in the US versus the UK? And it's not like kind of one big thing. It's not like we went to China and we suddenly couldn't, speak the language or read the signs. It felt like we were similar, but actually there were lots of small differences, lots and lots of small differences. And that kind of took me aback after a couple of weeks, because I kind of went in there maybe a little bit too confident that I would just, be in London one day and Atlanta the next and everything would be completely the same. Outside of the obvious different words and terminology that we use, a lot of the time it was, how are people actually coming into the conversation? How are they making that decision? What's been the thought process for them to get there? And when you're talking about things and discussing things, like, are you actually talking about the same thing? You can, half an hour later, you're like, oh, hold on a minute. I was talking about this. What are you talking about, So it really taught me to stop and check, check and reflect. That was something I hadn't done too much of previously, but quite often I would stop and say, okay, so what do you mean by that? Where do you want that to go? I want it to go here. Is that where you're going? And, outside of the obvious just of words.
That's really interesting, because there's not a language difference, but clearly there were semantics or cultural differences.
That's right.
So obviously we're sat here post Black Lives Matter, post everything that happened with George Floyd, and Atlanta's known as a place which it actually has quite a dense black population. Yeah. How was it having a young family out there? Did you feel any of the tensions that were going on in the US at that time? Yeah,
so you always feel it. It's not as integrated as, say, London is, for example. And I say London because in the UK, I think in our cities, we have quite a nice cultural mix and pretty good integration, I would say. When you move out of the cities, it is still very white majority. So the US felt like, although there were for example, Atlanta, if I just talk about Atlanta, which was my experience, although there were lots of black people, there wasn't necessarily the same integration on a kind of social level to the same degree as London. So we had a very privileged setup out in Atlanta, quite honestly. We lived in a beautiful suburb, lovely house, nice car, and all of that. And I also had a lot of respect and expectations of me of being a senior role in the US. I had a lot of leadership accountabilities as well, which I enjoyed and really relished. But my kids went to a school where there weren't a lot of black children there, compared to if maybe they'd have gone to one in the city of Atlanta. It would have been far more diverse, perhaps even far more black children than white. So that wasn't too different for them because we came from the suburbs here. But what was quite different was just the history of the US and the history of the South and the impact that had on some of the tone of the lessons that they were having at school. And sometimes the boys would come home and they say they learnt this at class today and this boy made this stupid comment. And my eldest would always say, why did we come to America? We're supposed to be coming here to learn and grow, and I'm teaching them, in his 12-year-old wisdom. And, I had to say to him, well, your learning is coming from helping people to understand who you are. Because one of the things that confused people so much was me being black British and the boys being black British. They could not get their head around it. You're African American. no, actually, no, I'm not. I'm Black British. Oh, you're from the islands, like the Caribbean. My parents are from the islands, but I'm Black British. They just couldn't get their head around it. So I used to make quite a joke of it in the office. So, you know, it's the kind of thing that they used to sort of like pull my leg and things like that. Then what was really nice was being in the office, working with a lot of black people was really great. I hadn't had that experience before, at all different levels. And that was really nice. And overall, regardless of race, colour, the people that I worked with at IHG in Atlanta were very, very welcoming, and wanted me to have a great experience of Atlanta, of IHG, of the States. So they would very proactively invite me to things because they knew I was willing to go and try things as well, and were very willing to sort of educate me on any differences that we may have had.
That's really, again, because you mentioned that's you going back to you being open and authentic and open to new experiences, and then also people open to inviting you in. Yeah, which I think is really interesting.
It's a real trust thing, you know, and it's not easy to give that trust, especially if maybe your experiences haven't been positive. I can see why people may be reluctant to do that, but for me personally, I think that's what's been just a really instrumental part of my growth.
Were there any bizarre situations or uncomfortable situations whilst you were out in the US or in Atlanta?
There's one moment when my son went on a play date, and he went, and the house that he went to, they were very wealthy, and the people that he went to were, they had a housekeeper, a black housekeeper, and when we got to the door, and I rang on the bell, and I said, "Oh, here's Josh, come for his playmate." And she said to the little boy that Josh was going to meet, "Oh, so you've got yourself a little Negro friend." And I had this real moment. I was like, oh my God, do I want to leave him in this house? Anyway, I had no choice because Josh was off. He saw this huge house and off he went running off. And I was like, so I'll be back at like 6.
Wow.
And for that entire time, I was like, oh my God, what have I put him into? Like, he's not prepared for it. He's only 10, you know? Anyway, he came back. I said, how was it? You know, how was the housekeeper? He said, oh, she asked me lots of questions about England. And, you know, from the questions he was asking, I thought, oh, she's just curious. So it was fine. Yeah. He was welcomed. Parents were great. You know, he ended up spending a lot of time with that family and became really good friends. But it was just one of those moments when you think, oh, have I prepared them for that?
Because there was also, I think, I remember you telling a story about the, was it the lady who delivered your post?
Oh, that's right, yes.
Being surprised that you were living in that neighbourhood, because it sounds like it was quite
it's a
wealthy neighbourhood. And
so one day I was at work and we had a UPS delivery, and my mum was staying with us at the time, and so the delivery came, my mum opened the door and the UPS driver was like, oh, I've got a delivery for me, and she said to Mum, like, she didn't know what to do. And I said, oh, yeah, that's my daughter. I'll take it. She said, your daughter? She said, this is your daughter's home? She's going, wow, she's done really well. And like, my mum was like, yes. So my mum was really proud. Yeah. But my mum kind of missed sort of like all the layers behind why this woman was like so impressed with it, you know? Because my mum just took it as, yes, she's done well. She's progressed really well. Not necessarily as a black woman, actually to come and to be able to deliver something, and this is somebody's home, was a really big deal.
And then you left IHG and went to the Collective, which is a really fascinating business, and that's obviously where we met, because I was supporting you with some work there. Talk to me about the Collective. What was that like? Yeah,
so I got to a point at IHG, we were going through another big transformation, and I spent some time reflecting and thinking about the past 7 years, and I thought I've really loved it. I loved everything about it. Even the challenging times that really pushed me to really sort of question who I was at times and really where did I want to go. It was all really valuable. But I really enjoyed the move from BA to IHG, and I thought, actually, I'd like to do that again. So I decided to leave as part of the transformation. And wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do when I left, but I just knew I wanted to do something different. I'd had the benefit of working with 2 large global companies, and I thought I'd like to try something smaller, a bit more nimble, a bit more entrepreneurship. And through the networks, I got introduced to the Collective, the exec team at the Collective. So the Collective is a real estate company that provides co-living spaces, but it's a company with a very strong heart and a strong purpose. And it's really about bringing people together and helping people to live as part of a community and helping people to feel less lonely in cities. So you might rent a studio from the Collective, but actually you live in the building. So you've got working spaces, communal kitchens, quiet spaces, library spaces. But the idea is that you've got a sense of community when when you're at home. So it was great for me. It was smaller, and I was able to be really part of that leadership team and work directly with the CEO and founder and the exec team about how we were going to help this company to grow. It's a very different business in that, again, that helped me because, as I said earlier, I'm always looking to grow. So learning real estate was new and good. But also as part of the business, there's a large hospitality element. So again, I was able to bring experience with me. And just working with a very different demographic, much younger workforce, very chilled and laid out, going to work in my jeans and trainers, and being able to do that and be really comfortable about it was just great. It's very, very energising. It's probably the best way to describe it.
And I remember when I met you at the Collective, I was amazed at how diverse the leadership team was, right the way from Raza, who is Indian ethnic origin.
That's right, yeah. Indian British, yeah.
And then all of the leadership team, all of the senior exec, all had different ethnicities.
That's right, yeah.
Was that something the business set out to do? Was it purposeful or accidental? How did it happen?
Yeah, I don't think it was purposeful. So it wasn't purposeful in that saying, okay, I now need to find someone of this background. But I think it was purposeful of Reza in that he was looking for like-minded people. So from a values perspective, from a purpose, what we're trying to achieve, and the exec team were very low on ego, which was quite new for me, quite honestly. So he had quite a talent, I guess, at picking out those types of people, and I think that's what kind of then ended up with the kind of diversity, because he also had diversity in experience, industry, life experiences as well, which was really nice to see that come together, and often led to lots of challenge and debate. So, one of the things that we always said at IHG is that we're really, really nice and we're true hospitality to everybody. Everybody wants to make you feel good, and we used to find it quite hard to have that kind of honest challenge because you didn't ever want anybody to really feel bad. So then working in an environment where you could have that, and it wasn't personal or anything like that, but you could have it, and always know that it was for the good of the organisation, was quite good.
I remember talking to you whilst you were at the Collective, and it seemed like there was a shift, because a lot of these things around diversity and inclusion are normally driven from top down.
Yeah.
So I remember having a conversation with you, it sounded like it was being driven from bottom up.
Yes.
And the leadership team was being challenged.
That's right.
About that.
Yeah, so when all the George Floyd incident happened, which kind of shook the world, I made a lot of people sit up and take notice in a way in which they hadn't done before. There was a groundswell from the team members at the Collective saying, what are we doing about this? This is not who we are. The very essence of the Collective and how it was formed was a complete opposite to anything that could be associated with poor treatment of others, racism and so on. So it's like, what are we going to do about this? So I kind of harnessed that and pulled a group of people together that were really passionate about it and said, okay, what can we be doing? And we came up with our own sort of D&I equality, diversity, inclusion plan, which looked at what we can do for our team members, the people working at the Collective, our members, so our people who live with us in our buildings, and our neighbours and our community, and our partners. And we just had 3 commitments for each of those, kept it very simple. But I was really keen to put something in place that was realistic for us. There was a lot of push, for wanting to make change happen overnight and make it really happen really quickly. So I wanted the plan to have a variety of activities in, because really to really make a shift in this space, it's going to take time. But you need enough things to happen to keep people engaged and to honestly keep the hope and faith that change can happen. And a lot of things that I realised, I guess I had learnt to manage myself through. So lots of microaggressions that maybe I'd experienced in my career. I was finding now that with the younger demographic, they had no patience for that stuff at all. Yeah, they wanted like, well, why would you accept that, you know? But it's just things that we'd sort of learnt to manage as part of, you know, trying to be a black woman progressing her career. You try to think of how you can do that in a way that kind of doesn't offend people or upset people, you know.
So you mentioned microaggressions.
Yeah.
Give me some examples. What were the kinds of things that you experienced?
Yeah. So I love the term. So I hadn't heard of it until the past couple of years. I don't know if it existed before, but it's a great term itself. But I think one of the things that sticks out for me a lot is when I was at BA, I worked with 2 other black women in our HR department. 2 were called Karen, obviously I'm called Elaine. But we found that whoever interacted with us, people would call us all Karen. And you might think, okay, but 2 of them were called Karen. They were, but they did different things. So even for them, they'd be speaking to one Karen about something else, about something that the other Karen was accountable for, just not recognising that it was the wrong Karen. Or even talking to me, I am not Karen. Now, we would manage that in a way as that, actually, no, I'm Elaine. Oh, I'll tell Karen about this, let her know that you've said that. But we'd always do it to never upset people. And we'd always we'd make light of it between us, between ourselves. But now I think, did I miss a trick there? Did we miss a trick? Should we have been more, I don't know, more forceful in saying to people, do you know that's the 3rd time you've now called me Karen? Do you know what I mean? And what is it about me that you can't remember that I'm Elaine? You know, we never put it back on the individual. We just took it on for ourselves.
And why do you think you just took it? Was it in the interest of keeping peace or just being nice? What was the reason you think you didn't push back?
Yeah, I think it's probably a cultural thing. I think we were often taught to, you know, be polite, respect others, you know, kind of make a way forward, but don't upset people as you're doing that. And the other thing that's often attributed to black people and black women is being seen as aggressive. So if you put forward an opinion, you can say it in the exact same way and the exact same tone as the white person next to you, and they'll say, oh, no need to be aggressive. And then you kind of think, was I aggressive? I wasn't aggressive. But again, I can only speak for myself. I never really called anybody out when that happened to me. You know, if you know, sometimes people say, what would you tell your younger self? I'd tell my younger self, actually, when people are doing something that you're not happy with and you know is not right, call them on it. And you don't have to be, you know, nasty about it or anything like that, but say something that makes them stop for a minute and reflect on what they've just said and how that's affected you. And if they haven't realised that it's affected you, because quite often it goes right over people's heads, explain to them how it's made you feel. You know, there were many times throughout my career I just let those things pass.
And is that something you're still mindful of, given that there is that stereotype, I guess is the right word?
Yeah,
that,
definitely.
You know,
yeah.
So do you feel like you tone down maybe some of the things that you want to say because you're aware that people may feel it's, or may see it as being aggressive?
Yeah, I think as I've got more experienced, more confident, quite honestly more senior, I've just been more comfortable in being who I am and calling out things when I see it. I'm not a very sort of loud person anyway. I'm quite calm. So it's not necessarily going to come out for me in that way as a natural thing. But there are people who talk louder than me or are more expressive than me, and they would receive that feedback far more frequently than me. So I think that's why when I received it, and I know that's just kind of not who I am anyway, it would feel even more alien to me. Yeah.
And are you saying that with the new generation, or the millennial, Gen Z, whatever you want to call them, that's just something they're not going to stand for, that they're going to be more challenging, and employers should expect to be challenged by people coming through the ranks? Yeah,
I think should definitely expect to be challenged, or be very careful of apathy. So if they may find that these people don't care and they think, actually, that means they don't care about me, they don't know about me, and they'll just walk with their feet. So you may end up losing some really great talent and losing your opportunity to grow that talent because they've decided actually that you're not for them.
So what would your advice be to employers about, given the experiences that you've had, about being more open, being more inclusive, creating an environment that's more authentic for people to come and be themselves in?
Yeah, I think look to self first of all and really get to know who you are as an individual. So self-awareness, it's a term we often talk about in leadership development, but it's so important. And to kind of know who you are and kind of the value you bring to others. And then really spend time in getting to know your people, get to know your peers, really get to know the people in your teams, the people that you interact with. And if you look around and you realise that actually the sorts of people you meet are almost all like you, or they've been the same types of people for the past 5-10 years, and think about how can you broaden that? How can you put yourself in an environment where you can meet different people from different walks of life and get to know more about them and share more about you as well. So help them to understand that there are others out there that they may not have had exposure to.
But where have you seen really good D&I talent growth, development strategies?
Yeah. Well, I think we're still sort of in the early stages of it. I think what we have now is we've got a really good understanding of why diversity, equality, inclusion is important and why we can't ignore it for our businesses. Previously, we spent too much time trying to make a business case around it and convincing people that this was just the right thing to do. Being conscious about how you can be inclusive is good business sense. So thankfully, we don't have to keep selling that. I think where people have made some good strides is where they've put money behind it. So they've funded the different initiatives that they need to fund, and they've maintained that funding because it will take extra effort, and that can't be done on somebody's when somebody's finished their day job, or you can't expect speakers to come in and speak to your people without paying them. So you need funding to kind of facilitate some of these. And some of the really great initiatives are where people have recognised that you've really got to look at your talent pipeline. So how can you start to grow your talent, whether it's through the entry-level roles that you have in your organisation or looking at the current population that you have and thinking about where are the strengths, the development areas of that population, and what are the proactive actions you can put in place to help them grow and develop into those more senior roles in the business. Otherwise, you won't have people in the talent pool to be able to choose from.
And when you say current population, do you mean the current internal population or externally as well?
Both, actually. So internal first, so what can you do with your own people, but also thinking a little bit more broadly about how you can influence the external talent pool as well. So, so if I think about HR, for example, from a people profession, how can I, as a senior HR professional, contribute to the growth of professionals of disadvantaged backgrounds, underrepresented groups? How can I help social mobility throughout the HR profession? How can I ensure that we see more people, more diverse talent in that talent pool? So how can I give back in that way as well? And how can organisations work with those types of professional bodies to work together on what are the skill sets that are needed? Can you offer work experiences, internships? How can you give people exposure to the workplace? So it's more of a, like a partnership that you've got.
And we've talked, the whole point of this series and what we're doing is to provide people with role models, and you've talked quite a bit about role models in the workplace that were really helpful, and mentoring and coaching as well. Who are your role models, and how has all of that helped you in advancing your career?
Yeah, so I've got all sorts of role models. So definitely a lot that I've made, that I've met through the work environment, whether they be really great inspirational managers that I've had or peers that I've worked with, has been great. But I also look externally as well. So I look at family. And my mum is probably my greatest role model and my greatest inspiration. When I think about how she's kind of navigated life and overcome like many challenges, but also been able to kind of raise a family and one that loves and cares for one another, is really inspirational, how she continues to overcome challenges. But also, when I meet other people through my network is really important for me. And it's nice to have what I call kind of lots of support bubbles. So, when I had young children, for example, it was always really helpful for me to be around other parents that had young children, but also to have connection to people who have been there, who could give you advice and guidance on things they did to help them when they were kind of juggling career and kids. And I remember one manager saying to me, when I was just about to get promotion, and she said to me, "Have you thought about what you're going to do with the extra money that you earn?" No. It wasn't a lot of extra money, but she said, this is a more senior position. She said, it's going to take more out of you. She said, think about how you can use the money to help yourself at home. I was like, what do you mean? She said, well, do you have a cleaner? When do you do your cleaning? I was like, at the weekends. She said, well, when do you spend time with your children? I said, well, not enough. She said, well, use the money, get a cleaner. So it's just like, like small things like that. And I think it's really helpful to have different types of support groups for the different types of needs that you have.
And is that all self-motivated? Do you actively go and seek that out yourself, or has that been facilitated by the businesses you've worked for?
Not been facilitated, actually. Sometimes I've gone out and sought it. See, I need a grammar support group, that's what I need. And other times it's just happened by accident, and I thought, oh God, thank God I landed here, just purely by accident. But if anybody is looking at what they can proactively do, I would say think about yourself and the kind of support areas that you need, and think about where you get that support. And if you don't have it, how can you get it?
And what would be your advice to anyone that is looking for that support? Where should they go and find it? Where's a good place to start?
Look to your network, look to your peers. Speak to your manager, speak to your family, speak to your friends. You'll be amazed actually that the kind of insight and help you can get from others if you put yourself out there and ask for it. You may find that people say, I don't know. There's always Google. Google can often give you ideas, even though it might not be the exact thing you end up doing, but it can take you into a path of discovery that you weren't open to before.
Because you're working with a few bodies at the moment as a mentor and a coach to people from various backgrounds. Yeah. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I work with the CIPD on the Aspiring HR Directors Mentoring Programme. So that's for people in HR, senior people in HR that aspire to be HR directors. And quite often it's a step, but you're not quite sure what the difference is. So it's quite nice to have some focused mentoring time around that. And of course, due to the mentoring relationship, that's often very different depending on the needs of the individual. But you give them an opportunity to discuss the more strategic elements of that role and often the increased stakeholder management that you have as part of that role. And then I'm also a mentor for the Women in Hospitality, Travel and Leisure Network, which is an organisation that's been founded to really improve diversity, equality, inclusion in the hospitality, travel, leisure industry. And some really great work and initiatives and programmes going on there. So I'm a mentor for them, and also they will contact me or I will contact them if there's any particular programmes that they're running. So I recently took part in some research with them. They have somebody doing some research into the careers of minority groups in the hospitality industry. So it's just nice ways, I think, that enable me to feel like I'm giving back and contributing and kind of helping to make a difference moving forward.
Thank you so much, Elaine. It's been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for being so open and sharing so much about your personal life and your experiences. As I said at the beginning, this is all about providing role models for people, and I think your experience has been brilliant for people to hear, and hopefully people find it useful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. To hear more of our interviews with senior leaders, you can subscribe to the Eton Bridge podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or watch the full interview on YouTube. Keep in touch with us via our LinkedIn page to hear about regular news and insights.